Hello, I'm Kayleigh, I'm a social worker in the UK. In this video I'm going to be talking about phone calls and social work because it's something that's something that we do a lot in our role, and it's something that can cause a lot of anxiety as well, and I think that's completely normal, especially if you are a newer social worker. I think it's normal to feel that way because maybe you feel that you don't have all the answers to the questions that people are going to say, but there's definitely ways around sort of managing that feeling of discomfort when you're on the phone. So I think the first thing is knowing what you're expected to say when you answer the phone or when you're making a call. So an easy way to find that out is to speak to the others on your team or speak to your manager. So for myself, I answer and say, hello, it's Kayleigh calling from so-and-so team and the council. I'm just ringing you to discuss this, and I state the purpose of my call as quick as I can, just so people know that it's a legitimate phone call, because sometimes we get a lot of spam calls on our phones nowadays, don't we? So it just avoids us sort of the phone call getting ended before you've even got through. I think if you are feeling anxious, something that you can do is write some bullet points of the things that you want to say, write down the name of the person, and maybe a family member have them their notes up on the screen just in case it throws you off if someone's voice answers that you're not expecting. And I think in that case, if someone answers that you're not expecting to answer, you have to just be really careful about not sharing information with that individual freely, because that can cause problems with confidentiality as well. In terms of actually gaining skills of talking on the phone and feeling more comfortable, I definitely think you can take from like a CBT approach or exposure therapy, and just doing it more genuinely helps. So avoidance can sometimes make your anxiety feel worse. So say you know that you have to make a phone call that day, but you're leaving it till the end of the day, that can burden you all through the day. So you might feel like you're being productive, but really it can stay in the back of your mind. So I think just making sure you're sort of aware of these feelings can be really good. And over time you will start to feel better with it, but it's perfectly normal if you don't straight away, or even as you're more experienced and maybe you're in a new office. Like, we all feel like that. It's just something that you feel, but you know, if it's something that's making you feel really uncomfortable, it's maybe like you need to give someone advice and it's a new area to you, you can always book a private room and just talk to them in there. If it's sort of a one-off thing that you sort of need to think about, giving yourself space to do that sort of thing is absolutely fine, and it's part of your professional judgment as well. In terms of something that helped me, I have my caseload organisational system, which I've spoke about before on this channel. I have a big video on it. But the reason I did that was that I wanted people's names and important facts about them to be available to me very quickly. So I press Control Find on my keyboard, and then I have people in those boxes, and then important notes, just because I sometimes feel like, especially when you're a new social worker, there's so much to remember anyway, that trying to remember the person, what you're dealing with, and also sort of their family members, key details, it can be really useful if you have your own notes that you can quickly get to, because sometimes it's not that easy to do that when you're just looking on the system that your organisation sort of provides, you know, your computer system. It doesn't always come up that quickly. I think another thing when you're new to making phone calls is not to sort of overpromise just because you're so anxious you want to get off the phone. So sometimes something you could do is someone's asking you a question and you've said, I'm just going to get back to you, I just want to run it by a colleague, and you might say, I'll get back to you in 5 minutes, but then you get off the phone and something else happens, and maybe you have to dash out the door on a crisis visit and you can't ring that person back in 5 minutes, but they're waiting. That can make you feel really anxious because you've promised that and now you can't deliver. And you can always get a colleague to call back, but it's not really an ideal thing to be doing all the time. So I try and think about sort of not giving someone a deadline like that unless it's absolutely necessary or I think it's important for that person. Because you do try and get back to people as quick as possible, but there's no point putting those things in place if it's not necessary. If you feel that maybe at this point you are going to have to run it past someone, that's absolutely fine. Just say, you know, you can say the parameters around the phone call, on the call really. You can just say, at this point I'm just gathering information, but I will have to run it by other members of the team, so I want to make sure that I'm giving you the right answer on this. And that's absolutely fine. And another thing that really works for me is if I'm giving, because I work in adult services, if I'm giving someone complex information about a service, or I need to give them information about the care charging process, sometimes it's useful to just get someone's email address and then say, I'll put an email together of this bit of information and pass it over to you. Sometimes that's helpful as well, because you're kind of not duplicating work as well, because you can you can use that to formulate your case note where you're discussing what that was. And I think how you sort of recording these things is really important. So if you make a phone call and maybe the phone call didn't go through and you weren't able to speak to someone, make sure your case note that you attempted to call, because that shows that, you know, what you're doing to actively sort of support that individual. And leaving voicemails can be good, but you also have to be careful about not sharing too much information if you're concerned about who may hear that. So that kind of brings me on to my point around phone calls where maybe you're concerned about other people hearing what you're going to be ringing the person about. So that's particularly evident in situations like domestic violence situations. So when I'm approaching a phone call in that scenario, I always would say something like, "Hi, I'm Kayleigh, I'm ringing from social services. I don't want you to answer if you're not safe to do so. I need to talk to you, but I want to make sure you're in a safe space to do so. Can you just answer yes or no if that's the case?" And then that sort of gives someone the opportunity to not share information with you, because you don't want to put that person in that position. And then the last thing I wanted to cover really is something that can happen that can make you feel uncomfortable as a practitioner, and that's when people are maybe extremely angry over the phone. They may be shouting or swearing at you, and there is, to a certain extent, an expectation on social workers to be able to deal with people when they're at the worst or they're at a low ebb, and that is part of the role. But there's a part where it becomes that we're not there to just take abuse, and we need to draw the line, because you can't really help people sometimes when they're in such a state that they don't feel they're able to communicate with you, because you're just going to get nowhere. So advice I'd have for that situation is to give people warning, but just to say, I'm going to terminate the phone call now, but I'll call you back when you've had a chance to sort of calm down and gather your thoughts. And sometimes you don't have to say that straight away. Sometimes by listening to someone, they do sort of manage to calm down, and it's fine, and you can have a discussion. But what you don't want to do is have such an intense sort of discussion where you find that you're raising your voice to match theirs, because that isn't appropriate. You need to make sure that you're maintaining your professionalism in the office, and also with that individual about respect and everything. And I think that it can be easy to sort of, I think it's one of those things that people can react in that way because obviously they have stress in their lives, but also we are missing the non-verbal aspect of communication, which can draw you and make you feel that you trust the individual you're speaking to, and you don't have that over the phone. So people can treat you as less than a person. I think especially when people have maybe gone to switchboard and then they've been waiting to get through and they feel like they've been passed from pillar to post, like it's very frustrating for people. And you know yourself when you're trying to get through and you just feel like you're just getting passed around. It's so frustrating. And then sometimes when you finally are there to speak to the person, they do calm down, and that's absolutely fine. It's just a skill of how you're meant to deal with that, and people on the team will tell you how they just how they adapt to that situation, and it's something that you learn over time. One last thing is, if you're listening in those headphones, sometimes it can be very immersive if someone's shouting at you, and if you have multiple of those phone conversations, it can make you feel very anxious and a bit shaky. And I think that's because it's like the fight or flight response, and you feel it's just like a reaction that you can experience to that stressful situation. So just look after yourself and give yourself a space. Maybe you need to walk away from your desk for a minute if that does happen. because it can build up stress through the day, which isn't good. So I hope that's been helpful. As always, like to share the practical tips, so if you'd like to like and subscribe, that'd be great. And see you next time on my next video.